The trade deadline is done, but that leaves a couple of roster spots for the Bucks, and the buyout market is starting to heat up. There seems to be plenty of interest this year. Let's go through a few of the names that the Bucks could potentially add to their roster, and maybe there is going to be some ownership change as well. A story came out over the weekend, so we'll get into that and ask whether there's anything to be concerned about if you're a Milwaukee Bucks fan.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. We're here for today's episode that is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. And we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of every single weekday. We didn't do a post-game podcast after the Clippers game. I personally needed a break. 3 pods on trade deadline day. And we do, listen, shout out to the viewers, Frank, and the listeners. I messaged you about this on the weekend, but last week, certainly on YouTube, was our biggest week on YouTube by a long way. People are very interested in the trade stuff. The subscriptions are going up. We appreciate it. It's free to do so. Jump on and leave your comments as well. And you have plenty to talk about today. The buyout market, ownership changes. We're going to get into it all, but we appreciate the support of everyone. Now, we should just quickly mention, by the way, Frank, the Bucks did beat the Clippers. We're not going to get into this game too much. It was a couple of days ago. We've got the Bucks and the Celtics coming up, but the Bucks have won 10 games in a row, their longest streak of the season, which we love to see. They're a game back of the Celtics still with an opportunity to gain some ground there and potentially a tiebreaker as well that could be meaningful in a couple of nights' time. So I shut you down with the buyout stuff the other day, Frank. And we've seen a little bit of movement. Reggie Jackson looks like he's off the board. Terrence Ross looks like he's off the board. Maybe the best way to go through this is just name by name of guys that are potential interest. Who's at the top? Who's the number 1 seed right now? Who's the top of your board if the Bucks can get anyone in the buyout market?
Well, I think we should probably start with the caveat that that buyout guys are, temper your enthusiasm, right? I think with
That's not
buyout
what we're here
guys,
to do, Frank. We don't need honesty. We don't need honesty.
Usually with buyout guys, right? Like a lot of times, right, the guys that people are most excited about are the guys that were like, you remember being good 2 or 3 years ago, and either they're on bad teams and maybe still are good, but there's some reason that they weren't traded for value, or there's some reason why they're in the position of being bought out rather than dealt, or again, maybe they just aren't good and nobody wanted to give up assets for them. I think the common thread of a lot of the buyout guys that we are seeing hit the market and usually is that a lot of them are guys that were traded as part of deals, were included because for salary matching purposes, something like that. And then they go to a new location and it's just like, yeah, we don't need you, right? I mean, John Wall going back to the Rockets. Don't think John Wall's going back to the Rockets, right? We saw Danny Green, one of the first names off the board, I believe also ended up in Houston. And I think 2 days ago, like Raphael Stone, the GM there, was making comments about like, oh, we like his fit here. And then, it's like, nah, he's leaving. He's going to Cleveland, which, is a nice pickup for a Cavs team that obviously has some deficiencies on the wing. But again, Danny Green hasn't played, right, because of a torn ACL. And similarly, Reggie Jackson, who I think would have been a guy that we would have talked about, kind of a guy that at least a couple years ago had a terrific, heater, especially in the playoffs for that Clipper team that went to, was it 6 games with the Suns? I don't think they were that close to beating the Suns, given that they were without Kawhi at that point. But he had a tremendous playoffs, and again, but has fallen off, right? And he was in a trade and gets bought out, but is purported to be heading back to Denver. I believe he went to high school in Denver, so I think there's some local connections there. So again, a lot of the other guys that might be in the discussion. We talked about Pat Beverley. Is Pat Beverley still good? I don't know. It didn't look too good for the Lakers, right? He gets shipped out. in a deadline day deal. And so similarly, another guy that appears to be headed to the buyout market. I think George Hill rumored to be headed to the buyout market potentially. However, not a guy the Bucks can re-sign due to changes that the league made. It was about 5-6 years ago. I forget when it was, but some changes were made. So basically, teams can't re-sign guys that they just traded out. So George Hill not eligible to be signed by the Bucks. Also, Serge Ibaka not eligible to be re-signed by the Bucks if the Indiana Pacers buy him. I don't think that was anybody on anybody's radar anyway. But again, that's just obviously a lot of the context. So I think there's an NBA.com. They had a list of potential names that could hit the buyout market. Why don't I just read through these real quick, Kane, and you tell me if you see any here that could potentially wet the Bucks whistle, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
These are in alphabetical order, right? Will Barton. I've actually heard I feel like we've heard a little bit of buzz that the Bucks could be interested in Will Barton. Similarly, was good last year in Denver, terrible this year in Washington. Was not traded. That's why he's a guy that's being talked about as a buyout candidate. We've talked about Pat Beverley probably way more than we need to. Dwayne Dedman, who had a little bit of an incident with a Theragun and did not seem to be enjoyed in Miami before he was shipped out to San Antonio before the deadline. Bryn Forbes, there's already been some Bryn Forbes buzz. I was joking that, Giannis maybe just wants a guy that he can use for assist hunting when he needs triple doubles, because Bryn Forbes will jack shots off movement, and we know he can hit those. I don't know if that's even. I think I'm only like 40% joking, by the way, that would be with the origin of this interest. Perhaps Giannis is the origin of this interest. We talked about Danny Green already off the board. We talked about the former Bucks. Reggie Jackson off the board. DeAndre Jordan, I don't foresee DeAndre Jordan being of interest to the Bucks. He's becoming available presumably because of Thomas Bryant landing in Denver. Kevin Love is interesting. I didn't even realize Kevin Love had sort of fallen off the Cavs rotation radar. I feel like every time the Cavs play the Bucks, Kevin Love scares me and ends up hitting some threes and annoying me. Because Giannis in particular doesn't really want to guard Kevin Love running around the perimeter, but again, potentially he could actually be available, which again seems a little funky to me, given you'd think their big guys could disguise some of his weaknesses. Derrick Rose, who we've talked about, I think when we talked about Derrick Rose, I think we talked about him being probably more of a buyout type guy than a trade interest guy. So perhaps that may come back around. Terrence Ross already rumored to be headed to Phoenix. Dario Saric landed in Oklahoma City. Again, potentially he could be on the move. And John Wall, who we discussed, I would say John Wall and Russell Westbrook, the last two names in this list from NBA.com. I'm going to hazard that John Wall will not be playing in Houston and Russell Westbrook obviously won't be playing in Utah. Already buzzed that Russell Westbrook could land in Chicago, which would just be, man, that'd be all sorts of interesting. And a couple other names that have been at least tossed about. Justin Holiday. Hey, always room for some nepotism when it comes to signing siblings of Bucks players. Drew Holiday, the only, Brooke and Giannis have already had brothers signed, so got to get another Holiday brother potentially in here. Corey Joseph, kind of that game manager point guard from Detroit. Frank Kaminsky, Wisconsin legend Frank Kaminsky, and Kevin Knox and Thad Young. Thad Young, I think in maybe 2 years ago was a really interesting name. I don't know that he is now. So let me put the pause button there. Any names that jump out at you? And I guess maybe the first question for you, Kane, is like, is there a position that you're like specifically looking at, or are you thinking of it through the lens of, hey, just like, is there anybody that's like actually like could be pretty good? And obviously some of that lens will be where do you have guys that might actually play, but anybody jump out, and what kind of positional fit are you looking for?
Yeah, there's a couple of names that jump out, and the position stuff is interesting because, again, it could be matchup determined by potential matchups you could see in the postseason. Yes, I'm talking about Philadelphia and Joel Embiid as well. So I've got interest in a couple of buyout guys. I've also got interest in LinkedIn jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on team members you should surround yourself with. Again, that is relevant in the buyout market, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve those goals. It's very, very popular. There are 875 million member profiles on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn Jobs will sift through all those using insights from your job post and identify the people that are most suited to your job. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply, of course. All right, so there's two questions that I'm asking myself when I'm looking at the buyout guys. The first question is, do you need a backup center? So first of all, I've got no interest in Dwayne Dedmon. Let me just throw that out there. Zero interest. But
is that a personal thing, or is that a positional thing, or both?
I just don't think he's good. I don't think he would be helpful. Nerlens Noel is another name I've seen thrown around there. I don't know what the situation would be, but I would be into that. And this is mostly just, most series I'm not too concerned about it. If you did get Philadelphia, I think it would be at least nice to have at least another body there in case you needed it. But the interesting guy that I hadn't really thought about too much, and it'll be fascinating to see what Oklahoma City does, is Dario Saric. Now, if you remember, he tore his ACL against the Bucks in the finals, and he kind of would have been a handy body to have. Now, I'm not saying that changes anything, but I do think that was a blow for the Phoenix Suns in terms of he can do some stuff with lineups. You can play small ball stuff with him. He's a decent defender. He shoots the three relatively well, and he's always been a kind of a smart player, I think, like as somewhat of a guy that can move the ball a little bit as a big guy or a small ball big man. So Saric is interesting to me. The problem I have when I come to the Bucks and thinking, I would like to have another big body is when it gets to this time of the year, and Dedmon is in that category, and obviously you mentioned DeAndre Jordan, like I don't think that they're actually helpful in a series against Embiid. Like I don't think they're going to do anything. So then you ask yourself, what are the actual options at this time of the year, or do you just go with a guard? The fact the Bucks kept Grayson Allen, I think, was a bonus with the Jay Crowder stuff and not needing to trade him. You've at least got another body there. I don't mind if they want to get Bryn Forbes, Frank. Now, I don't think that he's going to play in the postseason, and maybe I'm just saying this because I think he's going to come back. But there are some concerns with some of the guys on this list that it's like, okay, what impact are they going to have if they come in on the locker room? Is it going to cause any problems? We're talking about a very, very minimal role. And as you said, historically, if you think a buyout guy is going to come in and win you a playoff series, probably unlikely. So at least if the Bucks do bring in Bryn Forbes, it's another shooter. Do you think he can play deep in the playoffs? Probably not. But he's not going to be a problem. Everyone's going to love him. He's a champion with the franchise. He's going to come back in and fit well. So maybe there's higher upside if Derrick Rose has something left and you want to bring him back. Pat Bev also falls in that category. I'm not sure what kind of impact he would have. I know he's like super intense, and him and Javon Carter would be, if you wanted to, 48 minutes of crazy pressure defensively. But he also talks a lot of rubbish. He's done some stuff like the whole Chris Paul. Like, I don't know. I don't know what kind of impact Pat Bev would have on this team. And I would probably, at this point, I like the group they've had. I'm happy to play it safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Bucks in particular, the locker room vibes question is a pretty operative one, because I don't know that I see anybody that like immediately comes in and plays 15 minutes per game. And we know that injuries always happen. And, we saw that over the weekend. Chris has the night off against the Clippers, and, Bobby's obviously been out. And so in that game, I mean, you saw Marjon Beauchamp get first half minutes, right? And ended up scoring 10 points. A little bit, probably about, I think actually half of that came pre-garbage time, and then had another dunk. Giannis got a technical. Giannis technically got the technical. I'm trying to figure out if it was for hanging on the rim, but apparently Giannis got a technical bench, for his bench antics after Marjon got his dunk. But I mean, again, like you're only a couple injuries away from like that role potentially being somebody that plays. And I mean, think back to the championship run, right? Bryn Forbes has a complete heater against the Miami Heat. No pun intended. Actually, did not think that through. Outscores Jimmy Butler in the first round of the playoffs, and then is like a total, MIA pun intended, after the Miami series. He's completely absent, eventually loses minutes. And Jeff Teague, buyout guy Jeff Teague, ends up being a guy that plays for the Bucks through the finals. And I mean, hey, we'll always have that. What was it? The Game 6 Jeff Teague experience. I forget. I can't remember if it was Jeff Game 5 or Game 6. But when he had like 11 points or whatever it was against his former team to help the Bucks ease past them, right? Jeff Teague getting the A on the group project, as he said right after the Bucks won the title. So you know, I think it's a really delicate question. I think it's hard to really kind of like speak in the abstract about it, because I totally agree. Like, you need to add somebody that I think can accept just not playing. And again, maybe they can play in the regular season, but you already have, like, you know, especially with Chris now playing again, and we'll see when Bobby comes back. I think, you know, we heard probably like that's a 4 to 6 week injury. And I think we're like a little over 2 weeks into that. So the All-Star break, maybe after the All-Star break, you get Bobby back. But it's it's a delicate thing, I think, especially with a team that's starting to hit its stride. So I think, the first question is always like, if you're like going to be pissed if you're not getting 10, 15 minutes the rest of the season, and especially in the playoffs, then probably look elsewhere. And again, maybe that's the appeal of Bryn Forbes, because he did have a random series where he played well, and then, you know, he pretty much fell out of the rotation entirely, and, you know, didn't seem to be a bad apple about it. So, and again, the guy wasn't even playing in Minnesota, right? Which is, that in itself is also a red flag, right? That Bryn Forbes like kind of like has I don't know that he's like a demonstrably worse player, but clearly he has not performed at a high level this past season. So I think it's really hard to say, and I think the risk is always, you know, I mean, I'm not even going to sit here and tell you that like they should go after Wall or Westbrook, just because, well, Westbrook's a complete, you know, not even I mean, he's way too disruptive, and the lack of shooting, like, I mean, you couldn't, like, it would be insane to try to put him with Giannis for that reason alone. So I mean, we don't even have to talk about Westbrook, but
well, he also, to your point, he also would be. I can't imagine that he would be happy with 10 minutes,
even
10
15 minutes a game. Yeah, he wants
it's,
to play at least 25 minutes a game. He thinks he should be playing 30 minutes a game. I mean, the spectacle of him trying to take over LeBron's game where he's, you know, breaking the NBA scoring record. I mean, it was just like, man, I don't want this dude on my team, right? And again, I know he was looking for a change of scenery and probably felt like, you know, he'd been dragged through the dirt a bit with the way that
which I think he has.
He has, yeah, but I mean, it's also for a reason, right? So yeah, and I think, again, like, I mean, look at John Wall, right? Like, remember first week of this season, like John Wall has like a good game or two, and everybody's suddenly like, oh, they got John Wall for the mid-level, like, oh, you know, and it's like, yeah, and what happened, right? They were looking to kick John Wall to the curb, and I think if you're expecting John Wall to come in and be this, like, you know, old John Wall, like, that's just a really tall ask. And but that said, I think it is an interesting position the Bucks are in, because Javon Carter, hey, he did it again on Friday night. He's been a really nice change of pace defensively for the Bucks. He's been aggressive, especially of late, with his 3-point shot, and done enough offensively to be a complimentary, like, you know, kind of fourth, fifth guy on the floor, can take a shot when somebody needs to late in the clock. But I think it is a valid question. It's like, how do you feel about Javon Carter just being your backup point guard throughout the playoffs against all these teams, including the Celtics, right? Against a team as big and physical as the Celtics. So I think I definitely feel like they need to add another guard, preferably somebody who can handle it a little bit, and if needed, be able to be that kind of, you know, backup point guard-ish type guy. So again, I mean, I joked a bit about my affinity for Pat Bev from my wife's previous, you know, Houston Rockets fandom, and following Pat Bev back when he was like in his prime. You're not getting that Pat Beverley. I mean, he's had really good defensive metrics in previous years. This year it's fallen off, just overall, more his offense than his defense. But Kane's got the Bryn Forbes screen cap, Bryn handle life, showing him dribbling 2 basketballs at once. So there you go. He's making his pitch there. So yeah,
I just like the guy. Like the guy. I think he's very funny. Do I think it helps the Bucks in a big way? No, I think you're exactly right. I think ultimately, even if I have pause about it, if they did find a way to bring in Pat Bev, who, by the way, I was just looking at his basketball reference. He's never played under 15 minutes in his entire career, and he was playing 27 minutes a game for the Lakers. So again, I think there's some role stuff there. But if they brought in Pat Bev, I would get around it. I would talk myself into that being a nice move.
Yeah, I mean, it would be again. He's almost like too similar to the Bucks stylistically, just as far as being, in the kind of Crowder, Wes Matthews mold of kind of defense first guys that are not very athletic and offensively like don't bring any sort of like explosion, and you're pretty much living and dying with them being able to knock down some open threes. But I mean, is Pat Bev like definitely worse than Javon Carter at this point? I don't know. I'm still a little I'm still a bit nervous about, again, like the idea that you're throwing Javon in there and just expecting him to be the backup point guard throughout the playoffs. I mean, you won a championship with Jeff Teague doing that basically for the last couple rounds. So, I mean, it can be done, right? You don't need to have necessarily great depth at the point guard spot, especially given the playmaking the Bucks have at the non-guard spots, especially now with Joe Ingles in addition to Chris Giannis. But I think absolutely, I would want to have another ball handler. And then I think, again, if the Bucks are signing two guys, they have two roster spots. As always, I'm going to say financially, like, because the salaries are prorated, there's not as big of a tax impact at this point of adding somebody. I think like if you sign somebody now, it'd be like $800K or so rather than like 1.8, 1.9 million in terms of their contract value. But like we've said, there's about a 4x multiplier on that from a tax perspective. So a minimum guy is going to cost you probably $4 million all in, something like that. So it's not a trivial thing. And, I am curious, given the Bucks essentially spent at every possible opportunity this season, right? They gave Bobby the absolute most money they could give him. They gave Pat Connaughton a new contract, which, doesn't start until next year, but essentially it was about as much as you could pay Pat Connaughton. They, even went so far as to re-sign Jordan Nwora, which we debated the other day and discussed the other day what the implications were of that. There was no penny pinching with this roster this season, right? They spent the mid-level, the full tax mid-level on Joe Ingles. Like they've spent pretty much every dime that they could. And if they bring in two guys on, sort of buyout, sort of late season additions to fill out the roster, then same's going to be true here. Like they will have literally spent like basically every dime they could, which, hey, great. I applaud the Bucks and ownership in particular. We'll talk more about ownership in a minute. But, again, are those guys that you'd expect to play? Probably not. You hope you don't actually need them. But for that reason, having guys that are going to, be good soldiers is important. And again, I don't know, like with a guy like Derrick Rose, I mean, he wasn't playing in New York. So I'm sure if he goes someplace, he'd want to have a chance to play. I don't know how much competing for a championship, weighs in for these various guys. But I'm sure it's going to be a factor, the likely playing time that they're going to get. So yeah, so it should be some interesting names. And I think I expect the Bucks are going to get somebody who at some point was good in the last 2 to 3 years. But the question is, are they actually still going to have anything in the tank for this, spring and hopefully summer playoff run? And if they don't, then again, there's going to have to be an understanding that they just might not play.
All right, we can continue that conversation. I don't think we're getting to ownership today. Unsurprisingly, we've gone too long here, but I've got a few more questions for you around this roster, including the two-way guys, because we should clarify some stuff there as well, what the Bucks could potentially do, and maybe what they've done in past years, if there's any indication of how they're going to play this. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. We are at the midway point of the NBA season. Well, actually, we're well and truly beyond. But now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes drained. Now, the NBA Finals betting odds, these continue to be updated, and they've changed a little bit since the trade deadline. Boston Celtics favorites at plus 270. The Bucks closely behind, plus 410. The Phoenix Suns, they've made a bit of a jump here. They're now the favorites in the West at plus 500. For NBA Finals matchups, Boston Celtics and Phoenix Suns is the favorite, then Boston Celtics, Denver Nuggets. And what about the third favorite? The Milwaukee Bucks versus the Phoenix Suns at plus 800. Kevin Durant couldn't beat the Bucks in 2021. The Phoenix Suns couldn't beat the Bucks in 2021. So they said, let's get together and see if we can take down the Milwaukee Bucks. That would be a fun matchup if there was a rematch there. But make sure you go download the FanDuel app and don't miss out on your chance for a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So as we were talking about guys that have played a little bit, I don't think AJ Green, well, and funnily enough, a number of people that I saw when the Bryn Forbes stuff come up, they said, well, we've got AJ Green. He's Bryn Forbes. Maybe. But, Mamu, like, could they put him on the roster in case they need him to play a few minutes? I don't know. I don't know whether it's a likely thing to do. Those guys aren't eligible to play in the postseason. But if we look at what they've done in previous years, just for an indication with the buyout stuff, was Pau Gasol a buyout? I think he was, wasn't he? They signed him late in the season. I know he didn't have much of an impact. Marvin Williams was another one that they got that we were actually pretty optimistic about that one there.
And he was fine. I mean, he played. He was your like a backup four-man, right? And I thought they kind of misused him, right? Like having him play, the common thing we cite was seeing him playing, drop defense instead of doing like kind of pure switching with him as a four-man, which would have been the obvious thing. That was, kind of pre-Bud seeing the light in a lot of ways from a rigidness standpoint. But yeah, I thought Marvin Williams was a good buyout guy. And I mean, we've mentioned Javon Carter multiple times. Javon Carter was a really good buyout guy. Obviously played a role in the Bulls series last year, and then played in the first game of the Celtics series, and then kind of fell out of the rotation entirely. And again, it's hard to look back and say that Javon Carter was going to make a big difference given the size factor was such a huge part of the Bucks issues. But George Hill also physically wasn't right, and offensively didn't give you anything. So certainly Javon couldn't have been worse offensively than George was. But again, is that going to swing the series? I'm a bit skeptical of that. But yeah, Javon was a really good signing last year. Ironically, they took advantage of the Nets buyout signing of Goran Dragic and got Carter, and obviously he's a guy that has stuck with the Bucks.
And the other thing that they've made a habit of is just signing random guys, sometimes from overseas. Axel Toupane, NBA champion Axel Toupane. Rajon Tucker obviously came and spent some time in the back end of the roster. Luka Vildoza. So
NBA champion Elijah Bryant,
exactly right. So
third leading rookie scorer 2 years ago because he played only the last game of the season and scored 15 points. He remains in his NBA career as a 15-point per game career scorer. So yeah, there have been some random ones, but actually, and let me just a note on this too. So I think it's good you bring this up because this is one of these like kind of games that you can play from like a tax perspective as well. If you sign one of these guys literally in like the last week of the season, they're prorated. Basically, it always becomes this multi-year contract, right? Which means that it's basically like we sign you for the rest of this season, which, is a week of regular season plus the playoffs or whatever it might be. And then typically it's like a non-guaranteed number for the following season, which we saw with some of the guys that you mentioned, right? Like Vildoza, Rajon Tucker, like all those guys had non-guaranteed contracts that ultimately were not picked up, so they didn't stick with the team. So really just kind of like lottery tickets, right? Elijah Bryant the same way. And the upside of doing that, or the option of taking somebody like Mamu and converting him to a full NBA contract, is if you do that, like literally like at the last few days of the season, you can get them on very, very small prorated minimum contracts. So the impact on the tax is very, very low. And then, again, especially with the G League guys the two-way guys in previous years, in some years they've been playoff eligible. Typically they're not supposed to be. This year they're not, as of now at least. So again, like were any of us expecting, Mamu and AJ Green to play in the playoffs? No. But if they want to throw one of those guys a bone and say like, hey, we like you, we want to give you that non-guaranteed deal for next year, give you a full NBA contract for the rest of this year, which again is a very short period, but at least make you playoff eligible, use the last roster spot. it's an option. And let's just say that's kind of like a backdoor way of like, taking care of your guys a little bit, but also not taking a huge hit to your tax number.
Yeah, and I guess as we've discussed and as you've discussed, the tax stuff has clearly changed over the years from a couple of years ago where it wasn't really a factor. So it'll be fascinating. These names are going to continue to drop, so we'll see if the Bucks get involved. I think it was Austin Rivers actually was the one who suggested the Bryn Forbes stuff that he was going to sign in Milwaukee soon. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. Certainly when I tweeted that meme the other day, which was just a funny thing, I just thought it was a funny meme, but there seemed to be people that were aggressively against the Bryn Forbes because there is an idea that you can add someone that's going to absolutely tilt the championship scale. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, but if it's not Bryn Forbes, I'm probably in on Pat Bev, but we'll see how this all plays out over the next couple of days. I'm catching up with John Corrales from Locked On Celtics tomorrow because the Bucks and the Celtics have been at the top of the East all season long, and they've got this game on Tuesday night, which the Bucks looking for 11 in a row. Then they got the Bulls, so 2 more games before the All-Star break. It would be nice to go into the break with a 12-game winning streak. Make sure you check out the Game to Game podcast on your Locked On NBA feed to get your recaps of the night before's NBA action. Only 2 games today, and the Arvo being Super Bowl Sunday, but back into it tomorrow. So make sure you check out Game to Game. We want a 12-game streak, Frank. Come on.
By the way, you just used the term Arvo again, right? Which I think
Yes.
we've talked about offline. You want to tell
Arvo.
people what that means? This is an Australianism, which I think I used context clues to figure out what you were saying previously. But can you give people a little bit of slang, Australian dictionary here?
Look, if you can shorten afternoon to Arvo, why would you not do that? This is a very, very smart and efficient way to do work.
How are you
smarter,
spelling
not
that?
harder.
How is that spelled if you had to spell that?
ARVO, Arvo.
Afternoon becomes ARVO.
That's it, mate. 4 letters instead of, don't know, what is that, 9? 10. It's great stuff.
All right. Well, this is a little bit of culture 101 for our sickos out there who stick with us through the very end of these podcasts.
We love it. Let us know what you think the Bucks should do. I know everyone will have their thoughts and opinions, and they'll be looking ahead. So make sure you jump in the YouTube.
I'm anti-Bryn Forbes, by the way. I don't like. We've seen this movie before. I'll take whatever behind door number 2. Shout out to Bryn, NBA champion, heart you, blah blah blah. But I don't know. There are a lot. There's some guys I'm like nostalgic, bring them back. Wes Matthews, George Hill. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like again we had a good time. Bryn, move on. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, old Frank Madden starts the podcast by telling everyone that no one in the buyout market is going to have an impact, and now he's closing the door on a Milwaukee Bucks champion who won you a series and outscored Jimmy Butler.
It's true. It's true. It's true. It's slander. I mean, that feels like slander to our guy, Bryn Forbes. But I don't know. There's some reunions that I'm just less excited about.
All right, we'll see what happens. If anything does happen, maybe we'll chuck in an extra podcast as well.
We need to get Dante Exum finally, Kane. Just Dante Exum probably never going to play in the NBA again. Once or twice a year, we talk about him as though he might. Where's he playing? Serbia this year? He's in
Partizan
Belgrade.
And, playing well.
But loving the Balkan life. But hey, we'll keep talking about the idea of Dante Exum. It'll be an annual rite of passage, just like we always do the Derrick Rose. Could Derrick Rose come to the Milwaukee Bucks podcast every year? The Dante Exum is like the next level version of that, because literally there's been no discussion of Dante Exum ever coming to the Bucks, but we can dare to dream. He's the Aussie that I'll be with you on that one.
When he wins a gold medal at the World Cup later this year and plays a starring role and shutting down the USA, you will all finally believe me.
We'll all spend our Arvos looking up Dante Exum stats and dreaming of bringing him back to the NBA at long last.
We will see. As I said, we'll podcast tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe, drop your comments, hit like, all those things. It certainly helps us, and we very much appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow. What is this? No Bucks games for 3 days? Ridiculous.
It's too long. It's too long, Kane. They're gonna be rusty. They're gonna be rusty on Tuesday. It's too long.
I'll be rusty too by tomorrow's podcast. All right. See you, everyone.